Welcome back. Tonight we return to the deep American wilderness, where the old forests still hold secrets and the folklore isn't just legend. Settle in, the stories are waiting. My name is Victor Langston, and this happened to me on September 14th, 1994. I was a truck driver back then, running long hauls between Phoenix and Portland. The endless ribbon of asphalt had been my life for nearly 15 years, and I had grown to love the solitude that came with it. The mechanical hum of my 18-wheeler, the blur of yellow lines disappearing beneath my wheels, and the vast, empty landscapes stretching beyond the horizon. These were the constants in my ever-changing life. That September evening started like any other. I loaded up at the Phoenix Depot around noon, a full trailer of consumer electronics bound for a warehouse in Portland. The dispatcher, a gruff man named Russell with perpetually ink-stained fingers, handed me the paperwork with his usual grunt. "Should be an easy run, Vic," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "Weather's clear all the way through. Might get some fog near Twin Falls, but nothing you can't handle." I nodded, folding the papers into my breast pocket. "Sounds good. I'll radio in at the usual checkpoints." The first few hours on the road were uneventful. The Arizona desert rolled by, a landscape of rust-colored earth and stubborn vegetation. I had the windows down, letting the warm air rush through the cab as I sang along to Creedence Clearwater Revival. By the time I crossed into Utah, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I had always preferred night driving. There was something peaceful about it. Fewer vehicles on the road, less traffic to navigate, and a sense of being alone in the world that appealed to my solitary nature. My ex-wife Patricia used to say that's why our marriage failed. "You love being alone more than you love being with me," she'd said during our last fight. Maybe she was right. As darkness fell completely, I settled into the rhythm of the road. The headlights carved a path through the night, illuminating just enough of the world ahead to keep moving forward. I passed through Salt Lake City around 9 p.m., the city lights creating a glowing dome on the horizon before I plunged back into darkness. By midnight, I was deep into Idaho, with nothing but my thoughts and the occasional passing car to keep me company. My eyelids had begun to grow heavy, and the third cup of coffee from my thermos wasn't doing its job anymore. I knew the signs well enough: the slight drift of the wheel, the momentary lapses in attention, the way the white lines started to blur together. Pushing through fatigue was a rookie mistake, one that had claimed too many drivers over the years. There was a rest area about 15 miles outside Twin Falls that I'd stopped at numerous times before. Nothing special, just a small parking lot, a couple of vending machines, and a restroom building. But it was usually quiet, especially at this hour, making it perfect for catching a few hours of sleep. I signaled and pulled off the highway, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I maneuvered into the empty lot. The place was deserted, which wasn't unusual for 1 a.m. on a Wednesday. The only light came from a single lamppost near the restroom building, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. As I shut off the engine, the sudden silence was almost deafening. I sat for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling engine and the distant rush of occasional traffic on the highway. Something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a vague sense of unease settled over me. I scanned the parking lot and surrounding area. Nothing seemed out of place. Just the empty expanse of the rest stop, the dark outline of trees beyond, and the restroom building standing silent and still. Probably just road fatigue playing tricks on my mind. After locking the cab doors, a habit formed from years on the road, I climbed into the sleeper compartment. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but I'd made it as comfortable as possible with a decent mattress, clean sheets, and a small fan that provided white noise. I didn't even bother setting an alarm. My body clock was finally tuned to wake me after exactly 4 hours of sleep, no matter what. I kicked off my boots and settled onto the mattress, still fully clothed. The events of the day played through my mind as I drifted toward sleep. The shipment details, the route ahead, the call I needed to make to my daughter in the morning. She was turning 21 next month, and I'd promised to be there for her birthday, despite the strained relationship we'd had since the divorce. As consciousness began to slip away, I thought I heard something, a sound that didn't belong to the night. A soft scraping, perhaps, or the crunch of gravel under a foot. I strained to listen, hovering in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. Nothing. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just the normal sounds of a rest stop at night, the wind in the trees, distant highway noise, the settling of my truck. I closed my eyes again and let exhaustion claim me, unaware that this would be the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. I don't know how long I slept before the sound woke me. It started as a faint noise at the edge of my consciousness, gradually becoming more insistent until it pulled me from the depths of sleep. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, instantly alert. There it was again, a deliberate rattling of the door handle on my cab. My first instinct was to assume it was another driver needing assistance. Maybe their truck had broken down, or they needed directions. But something about the persistence of that rattling set off warning signals in my brain. No professional driver would try to open another trucker's locked door in the middle of the night without announcing themselves first. I remained perfectly still, my breath shallow as I listened. The rattling stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps moving away from my truck. Slowly, carefully, I reached under my pillow for the Louisville Slugger I always kept there, a habit that had earned me ribbing from fellow drivers, but had provided peace of mind during countless nights in isolated locations. The bat felt solid and reassuring in my grip as I eased myself up and peered through a small gap in the curtains separating the sleeper cab from the front seats. The parking lot was bathed in that sickly yellow light from the single lamppost, creating pools of darkness between patches of illumination. A figure was moving across the lot toward the restroom building. From this distance I couldn't make out many details, just a dark silhouette, slightly hunched, moving with an odd lurching gait that sent a chill through me. There was something wrong about the way this person moved, something unnatural that made my skin prickle with goosebumps. I debated my options. The safest choice would be to start the engine and drive away, putting this rest stop and its mysterious visitor behind me. But curiosity, that dangerous human instinct that so often leads to trouble, got the better of me. I needed to know who this person was and what they wanted with my truck. Decision made, I silently pulled on my boots and gripped the bat tighter. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and slipped out, immediately pressing myself against the side of my rig to stay hidden in its shadow. The night air was cooler than I expected, carrying the scent of sage and dust. The only sounds were the distant rush of occasional traffic on the highway and the soft whisper of wind through the surrounding trees. I edged along the truck, keeping my eyes fixed on the restroom building where the figure had disappeared. The structure looked ominous in the half-light, a simple concrete block with no windows, its entrance a dark rectangle like an open mouth. With my heart pounding in my chest, I moved across the parking lot, staying low and using the few parked cars as cover. Each step on the gravel sounded thunderous to my ears, though I knew the sound wouldn't carry far. As I approached the restroom, I pressed my back against the wall beside the entrance, trying to control my breathing. From inside came a sound that froze me in place, a soft thud, like something heavy hitting the floor, followed by silence. I tightened my grip on the bat, feeling sweat begin to form on my palms despite the cool night air. Whatever was happening inside, I knew I had to investigate. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the doorway. The interior was dimly lit by a single fluorescent tube that flickered erratically, throwing unsettling shadows across the grimy tile floor. The air smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking more unpleasant odors. 3 metal stall doors faced me, all closed. A row of sinks with cloudy mirrors hung on the opposite wall. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly. "Is someone in here?" No response. Just the soft buzz of the failing light and the persistent drip of a leaking faucet. I moved forward cautiously, the bat raised slightly. I bent down to look for feet under the stall doors, but saw nothing. Straightening up, I approached the first stall and pushed it open with the end of my bat. Empty. I moved to the second stall, my nerves wound tight as piano wire. Also empty, just a toilet with a cracked seat and graffiti-covered walls. As I reached for the third stall door, I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. I spun around, bat raised defensively. But there was nothing there, just the empty restroom, the flickering light, and my own reflection in the spotted mirrors. I turned back to the third stall, took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Empty, like the others. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. I was certain I'd seen someone enter this building, and I'd heard noises just moments ago. Where had they gone? As I turned to leave, something caught my eye in the mirror, a dark shape just outside the restroom door, a human silhouette standing perfectly still. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. I whipped around to face the doorway, but it was empty, just the night beyond, the parking lot, and my truck in the distance. I backed up against the sink, my eyes darting around the small space. Had I imagined it? Was fatigue making me see things? But I knew what I'd seen in the mirror, and I knew I hadn't imagined the sound of someone trying my truck door. Something wasn't right about this place, and every instinct was screaming at me to leave. I edged toward the exit, bat still gripped tightly, and peered outside. The parking lot appeared empty. My truck sat where I'd left it, its red paint looking almost black in the dim light. I scanned the area for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside and quickly made my way back to my rig, constantly looking over my shoulder. The short distance felt like miles, and by the time I reached my truck, my shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool night air. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat for a moment with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The baseball bat lay across my lap, a reassuring weight. Through the windshield, I could see the restroom building, its entrance a dark void in the concrete. There was no sign of anyone moving around the rest stop. Maybe I had imagined it all. Long hours on the road can do strange things to a person's mind. I'd known drivers who swore they'd seen impossible things during overnight hauls, from phantom hitchhikers to cars that disappeared into thin air. Sleep deprivation plays tricks on you. But the memory of that figure in the mirror, the distinct sound of someone trying my door handle, those seemed too real to dismiss. I decided I couldn't stay here. Whether my midnight visitor was a drifter looking for something to steal or something more sinister, I wasn't going to sit around waiting to find out. There was a proper truck stop about 30 miles ahead, where there would be other drivers, bright lights, and safety in numbers. I started the engine, the familiar rumble providing some comfort. As the headlights cut through the darkness, I scanned the area one more time. Nothing moved in their beams, just empty asphalt and the silent restroom building. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the rest stop, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors. As the highway opened up before me, I began to breathe more easily. Whatever had happened back there was behind me now. Soon I'd be at the truck stop, surrounded by other people, and this strange incident would make for nothing more than an interesting story to tell over coffee. But as I settled into the rhythm of the road, a new light appeared in my rearview mirror. Headlights, bright and steady, coming from a vehicle that had pulled onto the highway behind me. I watched those lights for several minutes, a growing sense of unease building in my gut. They maintained a constant distance, neither falling behind nor catching up. Just there, following. I told myself it was nothing, just another night traveler heading in the same direction. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong, and I was right. The headlights in my rearview mirror were like two unblinking eyes, staring me down as I pushed forward through the Idaho night. At first I tried to convince myself it was just another traveler, maybe someone who had been parked at the rest stop, unseen in the darkness, who happened to leave around the same time. But after 10 minutes of maintaining the exact same distance behind me, that explanation started to wear thin. I decided to test my theory. I eased off the accelerator, watching the speedometer drop from 65 to 55. If it was just a coincidence, the vehicle would either pass me or fall behind, as our different destinations and driving styles naturally separated us. The headlights slowed too, maintaining the same distance. My mouth went dry. This was no coincidence. I sped back up to 65, then to 70. The headlights matched my every move, neither gaining nor losing ground. In the darkness of my cab, illuminated only by the green glow of the dashboard instruments, I felt exposed and vulnerable. The baseball bat lay on the passenger seat, but what good would it do against someone in another vehicle? I squinted in the mirror, trying to make out what kind of car was following me. It was hard to tell with just the headlights visible, but it appeared to be a sedan of some kind, lower to the ground than a truck or SUV. The beams were set slightly wider apart than normal, giving it a predatory appearance. The truck stop was still about 20 miles ahead, and the highway stretched empty before me. No other vehicles in sight, no witnesses to whatever might happen. Just me, my 18-wheeler, and whoever was stalking me through the night. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel as I considered my options. I could try to outrun them, but a fully loaded semi is no match for a car in terms of speed. I could pull over and confront them, but that seemed like asking for trouble. My best bet was to make it to the truck stop where there would be people and lights. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a small road branching off to the right, not much more than a service road leading into the hills, probably used by maintenance crews or local ranchers. It wasn't on my planned route, but in that moment it offered something valuable: uncertainty. Whoever was following me wouldn't expect me to turn there. Without signaling, I didn't want to telegraph my move. I yanked the wheel to the right and took the turn harder than I should have. The trailer swayed dangerously behind me, the load shifting with a sound like distant thunder. For a heart-stopping moment I thought I might jackknife, but years of experience kicked in as I fought the wheel and stabilized the rig. The road was narrower and rougher than the highway, barely wide enough for my truck. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pushed forward, accelerating as much as I dared on the unfamiliar terrain. In my mirrors, I saw the headlights pause momentarily at the junction, then turn to follow me. A surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. This was no longer about curiosity or coincidence. This was deliberate pursuit. Whoever was behind those headlights wanted something from me, and I had no intention of finding out what. The road began to climb, winding up into the hills with sharp turns that forced me to slow down. Each curve was a struggle with the heavy rig, the trailer wanting to continue straight while I fought to keep it on the increasingly treacherous path. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, and sweat ran down my back despite the cool air rushing through the cab. Behind me, the headlights were having an easier time navigating the turns. They were gaining ground, the distance between us shrinking with each passing minute. In the rearview mirror, I could now make out the general shape of the vehicle. A dark sedan, possibly black or navy blue, with no distinguishing features I could discern in the darkness. The road crested a hill and began to descend into a shallow valley. The moonlight revealed a landscape of scrubby vegetation and rock formations, ghostly in the silver light. No houses, no other roads, just wilderness stretching in all directions. I had made a terrible mistake. Instead of heading toward safety and other people, I had driven myself deeper into isolation. If the car caught up to me out here, there would be no one to witness what happened, no one to help. The realization sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I pushed the accelerator harder, taking risks I normally wouldn't, feeling the big rig shudder and protest as I forced it to speeds unsafe for this terrain. The engine roared, the transmission whined, but I kept going, desperate to maintain distance between myself and my pursuer. Ahead, the road split again, one branch continuing down into the valley, the other veering sharply uphill. I took the uphill route, hoping the steeper grade would be more challenging for the car than for my powerful truck. The engine strained as we climbed, but the torque held, pulling us steadily upward. In the mirrors, I saw the headlights pause at the fork, then follow my path, but they seemed to be struggling more now, the beams bouncing and jerking as the car navigated the rough terrain. I was gaining distance, not much but enough to give me a flicker of hope. The road narrowed further as it climbed, becoming little more than a dirt track. Low-hanging branches scraped against the sides of my trailer, and I winced at the thought of explaining those scratches to my boss. But that was a problem for later, if there was a later. After about 10 minutes of climbing, I noticed something in the distance, a wide spot in the road, possibly a turnout or old camping area. It was partially concealed by a stand of trees, just visible in the moonlight. An idea formed in my mind, risky but potentially effective. I slowed slightly as I approached the clearing, then quickly pulled in and cut the engine. With practiced motions, I shut off all lights and sat in complete darkness, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and my own ragged breathing. Minutes passed. I strained my ears for the sound of an approaching vehicle, my eyes fixed on the road behind me. Had I lost them? Was it over? Then I heard it, the growl of an engine, growing louder as it climbed the hill. I held my breath as the sound intensified, my hand instinctively reaching for the baseball bat beside me. Headlights appeared around the bend, cutting through the darkness. The car was moving slowly now, as if searching. I pressed myself lower in my seat, though I knew I couldn't be seen through the truck's high windows from their angle. The sedan crept past my hiding spot, its headlights sweeping across the trees but not penetrating to where I sat concealed. It was indeed a dark sedan, black or dark blue, American-made from what I could tell, with no distinctive markings or license plate I could read in the darkness. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just a silhouette behind the wheel, a single figure, head slightly hunched forward as they scanned the road ahead. Something about that posture seemed familiar, reminding me of the figure I'd seen at the rest stop. The car continued up the road, its taillights growing smaller until they disappeared around another bend. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. No sign of the car returning. Relief flooded through me, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I needed to get back to the highway, to civilization and other people. Starting the engine would announce my presence if the driver was still nearby, but I had no choice. I turned the key, wincing at the loud rumble that broke the night silence. Without turning on my headlights, a dangerous move but necessary, I eased back onto the road and began to descend the way I had come. I drove by moonlight alone, straining to see the path ahead while constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of those pursuing headlights. The descent seemed to take forever, each curve and dip in the road a potential disaster in the dim light. But gradually the terrain began to level out, and I recognized landmarks from earlier, the fork in the road, a distinctive rock formation, a dead tree struck by lightning. I was heading back toward the highway. As I approached the junction with the main road, I finally allowed myself to turn on the headlights. The highway stretched empty in both directions, no sign of the mysterious sedan. I pulled back onto the asphalt with a sense of profound relief, the familiar smooth surface a welcome change from the rough dirt track. The truck stop was still ahead, its promise of safety and human contact now more appealing than ever. I pushed the accelerator down, eager to reach it, but kept vigilant, checking my mirrors every few seconds for any sign of pursuit. None came. The road behind remained empty all the way to the truck stop, its neon sign a beacon of safety in the night. The parking lot was half full, not busy, but enough other vehicles to provide the comfort of witnesses. I pulled into a space near the front of the building, under the bright security lights, and shut off the engine. For several minutes I just sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, letting the adrenaline slowly drain from my system. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my muscles ached from tension. But I was safe, at least for now. I grabbed my bat and climbed out of the cab, locking it securely behind me. The cool night air felt good on my face as I walked toward the brightly lit building, its windows revealing the comforting sight of other people going about their normal late-night routines. As I reached the door, I couldn't help looking back at the dark highway stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, someone had tried to follow me, someone who had first tried to get into my truck at the rest stop, someone who hadn't given up easily. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the familiar sounds of conversation, clinking dishes, and country music washing over me. But even surrounded by light and people, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever or whoever had been pursuing me was still out there in the darkness, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were waiting for me to get back on the road. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I dozed fitfully in my truck, parked under the brightest light in the truck stop lot, waking at every sound and movement outside. By the time dawn broke, streaking the sky with pale pink and gold, my eyes felt like they were lined with sandpaper, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. The events of the night kept replaying in my mind. The figure at the rest stop, the chase along the dirt road, the dark sedan with its relentless headlights. None of it made sense. Why would someone target a random truck driver? What could they possibly want from me? As the sky lightened fully, I made my way into the truck stop restaurant, drawn by the smell of coffee and the promise of normality. The place was starting to fill with the morning crowd, drivers getting ready to hit the road, locals stopping in for breakfast before work. I took a booth near the back, facing the door out of newfound paranoia. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought me coffee without asking. "You look like you need this, honey," she said, filling my cup to the brim. Rough night? I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. You could say that. She gave me a sympathetic look and took my breakfast order: eggs, bacon, toast. Simple, familiar food that I hoped would ground me back in reality. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed another driver watching me from the counter. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and thick gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. There was something assessing in his gaze, something that made me uneasy. After a moment, he picked up his own coffee and made his way over to my booth. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. I hesitated, then gestured to the seat across from me. He settled in with a grunt, studying me over the rim of his mug. "Name's Morris," he said finally. "Been driving these routes for almost 40 years now." "Victor," I replied, 15 years on the road myself. He nodded as if confirming something. "You ran into trouble last night, didn't you?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you say that?" "Seen that look before," Morris said, taking a sip of his coffee. "That 1,000-yard stare. Something spooked you good." He leaned forward slightly. "Let me guess. Rest stop outside Twin Falls. Dark vehicle following you after?" A chill ran through me despite the warm coffee in my hands. "How did you know that?" Morris glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Because you're not the first, son, not by a long shot." My breakfast arrived, but my appetite had vanished. I pushed the plate aside as Morris continued. "Started maybe 5, 6 years ago. Drivers reporting strange experiences at that rest stop. Someone trying their doors at night, shadowy figures, and always that same dark car following after." "Who is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do they want?" Morris shook his head. "Nobody knows for sure. Police say it's nothing, probably just some local kids messing with drivers for kicks. But," he trailed off, looking out the window at the brightening day. "But what?" I pressed. 3 drivers have gone missing in the last 2 years, all of them last seen fueling up near Twin Falls." He met my eyes steadily. "Official story is they abandoned their rigs, walked away from the job. Happens sometimes, especially with newer drivers who can't handle the lifestyle. But all 3 were veterans like us, men with families with retirement plans, not the type to just disappear." I thought about the figure I'd seen, the persistent pursuit. It hadn't felt like a prank. There had been something deliberate about it, something predatory. "You reported this to the police?" I asked. Morris gave a bitter laugh. "Course I did, so did others. They took statements, said they'd look into it. Nothing ever came of it. Local sheriff thinks it's just truck stop myths, stories drivers tell to keep themselves awake on long hauls." The waitress refilled our cups, giving Morris a familiar nod. When she was gone, he continued, his voice even lower. "There's talk among the older drivers. They say it's someone who lost family to a truck accident years ago, out for revenge, targeting random drivers. Others say it's something worse." He paused. "I don't put much stock in ghost stories, but whatever or whoever is out there, they're dangerous." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you survived an encounter," Morris said simply. "Most who get followed just get scared, pull into a truck stop like this, and that's the end of it. But a few," he sighed, "a few decide to investigate to figure out what's going on. Those are the ones who don't come back." I thought about my decision to check the restroom building instead of just driving away. How close had I come to being one of those who didn't return? "My advice," Morris continued, "finish your delivery in Portland, then request routes that keep you away from this stretch of I-84, at least for a while. Let whatever this is blow over." He drained his coffee and stood up, dropping a few bills on the table. "Be careful out there, Victor, and maybe invest in a CB radio if you don't have one already. Safety in numbers and all that." With that, he walked away, nodding to a few other drivers as he left the restaurant. I stared after him, my food growing cold and my coffee bitter in my mouth. I needed to call someone, to share what had happened and what I'd just learned. My first thought was to contact my best friend in the business, a driver named Garrett, who had started around the same time I did. We'd been through a lot together over the years, breakdowns in remote locations, dangerous weather, the dissolution of both our marriages. If anyone would believe me without judgment, it would be him. There was a payphone near the restrooms. I dug some quarters from my pocket and dialed Garrett's home number, hoping to catch him between runs. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "Garrett, it's Vic," I said, relief washing over me at the sound of a friendly voice. "Sorry to wake you." "Vic?" He yawned loudly. "What time is it? Where are you calling from?" "Truck stop outside Jerome. Listen, something happened last night, and I need to talk to someone about it." There must have been something in my voice that communicated the urgency, because he was immediately more alert. "What's going on? You okay?" I told him everything. The rest stop, the figure, the chase, and what Morris had just shared with me. Garrett listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "You believe me, right?" I finally asked, hating the note of desperation in my voice. "Course I do," Garrett said firmly. "We've known each other too long for lies. But Jesus, Vic, this is some serious shit. Tell me about it." I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "What do you think I should do?" "Morris is right about one thing. You should stay away from that stretch of road for a while. I've heard whispers about that rest stop myself, though nothing as detailed as what you just told me. Drivers avoiding it, especially at night." "Why hasn't anyone done anything about it?" I demanded, frustration rising. "If drivers are disappearing—" "You know how it is," Garrett cut in. "Truckers are invisible until something goes wrong. Then we're the villains. Nobody pays much attention when one of us goes missing, especially with no bodies, no evidence of foul play." He was right, and we both knew it. Long-haul drivers existed in a kind of limbo, always moving, rarely connected to any one place. Easy to overlook, easy to forget. "Look," Garrett continued, "finish your Portland run, but keep your eyes open. Don't stop anywhere isolated. Stick to well-lit areas with other people around. And when you get back, maybe take some local routes for a while. Give whatever this is time to move on." "Yeah," I said, though the idea of changing my routine because of this incident rankled. I'd never been one to back down from a challenge. "I'll think about it." "Don't just think about it, do it," Garrett insisted. "I've got a bad feeling about this whole thing. And Vic? Call me when you get to Portland. Let me know you made it safe." "Will do," I promised, touched by his concern. "Thanks for listening. Anytime, brother. Be careful out there." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, processing. The conversation with Garrett had helped ground me, but I still felt unsettled. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed a state trooper's car pulling into the lot. Without really thinking about it, I changed direction to intercept him. Maybe an official report would help. At the very least, it would create a record if anything else happened. The trooper was young, probably not more than a few years out of the academy. He looked tired as he climbed out of his patrol car, likely nearing the end of a long night shift. "Excuse me, officer," I called out. "Could I have a word?" He turned, assessing me with the automatic wariness of law enforcement. "Something I can help you with, sir?" "I'd like to report an incident from last night," I said. "Attempted break-in of my truck and a vehicular pursuit afterward." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Not surprise, but recognition. "Let me guess, rest stop outside Twin Falls?" The fact that he immediately knew stunned me into momentary silence. "Yes," I finally managed. "How did you—" "Why don't we talk inside?" he suggested, gesturing toward the truck stop. "I could use some coffee anyway." I followed him back into the restaurant, to a booth far from where I'd sat with Morris. The trooper ordered coffee from the same waitress, who raised an eyebrow at seeing me return but said nothing. "Officer Ryan Keller," he introduced himself once we were settled. "Idaho State Police." "Victor Langston," I replied. "You seemed to know what I was going to say before I said it." Keller nodded, stirring sugar into his coffee. "We get reports about that rest stop every few months. Someone trying door handles, strange figures, vehicles following drivers afterward. Been going on for years. And you haven't caught whoever's doing it?" I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. If he was offended, he didn't show it. "We patrol the area regularly, increased presence after dark, but it's a big stretch of highway, and we can't be everywhere. Whoever's doing this knows the patterns, knows when to strike." "I was told drivers have gone missing," I said, watching his reaction carefully. Keller's face gave nothing away. There have been some unexplained disappearances, yes, but no evidence of foul play, no abandoned vehicles showing signs of struggle. So you think they just walked away? Professional drivers with years on the road? He sighed, setting down his spoon. What I think and what I can prove are two different things, Mr. Langston. I've been pushing for a task force to investigate these incidents as connected events, but without hard evidence, it's difficult to justify the resources. I leaned forward. Let me give you some evidence then. Last night, around 1 a.m., I recounted my experience in detail, watching as Keller took notes in a small pad. When I finished, he flipped the notebook closed and tucked it into his breast pocket. I'll file an official report, he said. Maybe this will help push things forward. Can you describe the vehicle that followed you? Make, model, license plate? Dark sedan, possibly American-made. Couldn't see any plates or distinguishing features in the darkness. Keller nodded, unsurprised by my vague description. And the person at the rest stop? Height, build, clothing? I shook my head. Medium height, maybe. Moved strangely, kind of hunched over. It was too dark to see more details. Not much to go on, Keller said, but his tone was sympathetic rather than dismissive. But your account matches others we've received. The pattern is consistent, which does suggest a single perpetrator rather than random incidents. What should I do now? I asked. Continue your route, but stay alert. Avoid isolated rest stops, especially after dark. And here, he pulled a card from his wallet and wrote a number on the back. My direct line. If you notice anything suspicious, or if you remember any additional details, call me immediately. I took the card, oddly reassured by this official acknowledgement of my experience. Thank you, officer. Keller stood, leaving money for his coffee. Be safe out there, Mr. Langston, and know that we are taking these incidents seriously, even if it doesn't always seem that way. As he walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that I'd been believed, frustration at the lack of progress in stopping these incidents, and a lingering fear that whoever had targeted me might try again. I returned to my truck, climbed into the cab, and sat for a long moment, staring at the highway through the windshield. The day was fully bright now, the parking lot busy with the comings and goings of other drivers. In the light of day, the events of the night before seemed almost dreamlike, a product of fatigue and isolation. But the business card in my pocket was real. Morris's warnings were real, and whatever or whoever had followed me through the darkness was still out there, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting for another opportunity. I started the engine, determined to reach Portland by nightfall. I wouldn't be stopping at any more isolated rest areas, not on this trip, and maybe not ever again. As I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't help scanning the vehicles around me, searching for a dark sedan that might be following at a distance. But in the bright light of day, with other traffic all around, that fear began to recede. I had survived the night, and now I had people who knew what had happened. Morris, Garrett, Officer Keller. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Still, as the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somehow, in ways I couldn't yet understand, my encounter at the rest stop had changed something fundamental. As if I'd crossed a threshold into a darker reality that had been running parallel to my ordinary life all along. A reality that, now that I'd glimpsed it, might never let me go. 3 weeks passed. I completed my Portland delivery without incident, and took Garrett's advice about sticking to local routes for a while. The routine work, shorter hauls, familiar roads, nights spent in my own bed rather than the sleeper cab helped restore a sense of normalcy. The memories of that night at the Twin Falls rest stop began to fade around the edges, taking on the quality of a particularly vivid nightmare rather than lived experience. I spoke with Garrett regularly, and with Officer Keller twice more as he compiled his report. But without new information or developments, there wasn't much to discuss. Life went on, the road called, and eventually I knew I would have to answer. The assignment came on a Tuesday morning in early October, another long-haul run from Phoenix to Portland, virtually identical to the one that had led me to that fateful rest stop. I could have refused it, requested a different route, but something in me resisted the idea of allowing fear to dictate my choices. I had been driving this corridor for 15 years before that night. I wouldn't let one bad experience chase me away from it permanently. "You sure about this, Vic?" Russell asked when I accepted the job without hesitation. "Heard you had some trouble on your last run up that way." News travels fast in the trucking community. I shouldn't have been surprised that Russell knew something had happened, even if he didn't know the details. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It was probably just some local trying to mess with out-of-state drivers. Lightning doesn't strike twice." Russell didn't look convinced, but he handed over the paperwork anyway. "Your call. Just be careful out there." I loaded up and hit the road around noon, just as I had 3 weeks earlier. The day was cooler now, autumn asserting itself even in the desert southwest. I drove with the windows cracked, enjoying the fresh air and the sense of freedom that had drawn me to trucking in the first place. As I crossed into Utah, I called Garrett from a payphone at a gas station. "You're doing what?" he demanded when I told him about my route. "After everything that happened?" "I can't avoid that highway forever," I reasoned. "Besides, I'm not planning to stop at that rest area. I'll push through to the truck stop in Jerome where we met Morris." Garrett made an exasperated sound. "Stubbornness will get you killed one day, Vic. Promise me you'll be careful. No heroics, no investigations, no stopping anywhere isolated." "I promise," I said, meaning it. "This is just about not letting fear control me. I'll be smart about it." We talked a bit longer, Garrett extracting multiple promises of caution before finally letting me go. As I hung up the phone, I realized how much I valued his friendship. His concern was genuine, born of years of shared experiences and mutual trust. Back on the road, I settled into the familiar rhythm of highway driving. The hours passed smoothly, the truck's engine a reassuring rumble beneath me as I pushed northward. I made good time through Utah and into Idaho, stopping only for fuel and quick bathroom breaks at busy travel centers. As night fell, I found myself approaching the stretch of highway where the Twin Falls rest area was located. Though I had no intention of stopping there, I couldn't help the tension that crept into my shoulders as I drew closer. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I found myself checking the mirrors more frequently, scanning for headlights that might be following too consistently. I was about 5 miles from the rest area when I saw the flashing lights ahead, red and blue pulses illuminating the night. As I drew closer, I could make out several police cars, their light bars creating a kaleidoscope of color on the asphalt. They had the entrance to the rest area blocked off with the yellow crime scene tape stretching between the vehicles. My heart rate kicked up. Without really thinking about it, I signaled and pulled onto the shoulder about 100 yards past the scene. Something was happening, something connected to my experience. I was certain of it. I had to know what. I grabbed my jacket and climbed down from the cab, locking it behind me. The night air was cold now, carrying the first hints of winter as I walked back toward the police cars. An officer spotted me approaching and moved to intercept, his hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Area's closed, sir," he called out. "You'll need to move along." "I'm not stopping here," I explained, stopping at a respectful distance. "Just curious what's going on. I had an incident at this rest area a few weeks back." The officer studied me for a moment, then recognition dawned on his face. "You're Langston, aren't you? The driver who filed a report with Trooper Keller?" I nodded, surprised to be known. "That's right." He glanced back at the scene, then to me again. "Wait here," he said, then walked over to confer with another officer near one of the patrol cars. After a brief conversation, he returned with the second officer, an older man with salt and pepper hair, and the bearing of someone in charge. "Mr. Langston," the older officer said, extending his hand. "Detective Warren, Idaho State Police. Officer Keller mentioned your report. Good timing. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind." "What's happened here?" I asked, shaking his hand. Warren's expression was grim. "We found a vehicle abandoned in the tree line behind the rest area. Dark blue Chrysler sedan, reported stolen from Salt Lake City 3 weeks ago." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through me. "The night of my incident," I said quietly. Warren nodded. "Precisely. We're still processing the scene, but preliminary evidence suggests the vehicle has been used in multiple incidents of harassment and stalking of truck drivers in this area." "Have you found who was driving it?" I asked, hardly daring to hope for a resolution. "Not yet," Warren admitted. "But we did find some concerning items in the trunk. Items that suggest this may be more serious than simple harassment. The way he said it made my blood run cold. What kind of items? Warren hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. Personal effects that may belong to missing drivers. We're still cataloging everything, but there's enough to justify a full investigation now. I thought of Morris's warnings, the 3 drivers who had disappeared. So I was right, I said. Someone has been targeting truckers. It appears so, Warren acknowledged, which makes your report all the more valuable. You're one of the few who had a close encounter and lived to tell about it. He pulled out a notepad. Would you mind going over your experience once more? Any detail, no matter how small, could help us build a profile. For the next 20 minutes I stood in the cold night air recounting everything I could remember about that night. The figure at the rest stop, the chase along the dirt road, every impression and observation. Warren took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he closed his notepad and regarded me thoughtfully. You did well to trust your instincts that night, Mr. Langston. Based on what we're finding here, the outcome could have been very different. The implication hung in the air between us. I had escaped something terrible, something that others hadn't. So what happens now? I asked. We continue the investigation, Warren said. Process the evidence, try to identify any victims, build a case, and we'll need you to come in sometime soon for a formal statement and possibly to look at some photos. Photos, I repeated. Potential suspects, Warren clarified. We have several persons of interest, individuals with histories of violence, connections to truck accidents, that sort of thing. You might recognize the person you saw. I nodded, though I doubted I'd be able to identify anyone from the brief glimpse I'd had in poor lighting. Whatever I can do to help. Warren handed me his card. Call this number tomorrow. We'll set up a time for you to come in. He glanced back at the scene where officers were stringing more tape around the perimeter of the rest area. In the meantime, I'd still advise caution. Until we have someone in custody, the threat remains. Understood, I said, putting the card in my pocket alongside Keller's. Thank you for taking this seriously. Warren's expression softened slightly. We always took it seriously, Mr. Langston. We just lacked the evidence to act until now. Your report helped change that. You may have saved lives by coming forward. With that, he shook my hand again and returned to the investigation. I walked back to my truck, my mind racing with this new information. The abandoned sedan confirmed what I had experienced, validated the fear and uncertainty I'd been carrying for weeks. But it also raised new questions. Who was behind this? What was their motive? And most disturbing of all, what had happened to the drivers who didn't escape? I climbed back into my cab and sat for a long moment, staring at the flashing lights in my mirror. Part of me wanted to stay, to learn more, to see this through to its conclusion. But I had a delivery to make, and Warren would contact me when they needed me. The best thing I could do now was continue on my way and let the professionals do their job. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, driving past the rest area without stopping. As the police lights faded in my mirrors, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the investigation was progressing, unease at the confirmation of danger, and a lingering dread that seemed reluctant to release its grip on me. The truck stop in Jerome appeared ahead, its lights a welcome sight in the darkness. I pulled in and parked, too wired from my conversation with Detective Warren to sleep yet. I needed to talk to someone to process what I'd learned. I called Garrett from the payphone, waking him up again, but knowing he wouldn't mind given the circumstances. As I recounted my conversation with Warren and the discovery of the abandoned car, Garrett listened in silence. Jesus, he said when I finished. So it was real, all of it. Very real, I confirmed, and apparently worse than we thought. What are you going to do now? He asked. Complete this run, then go back to meet with the investigators. Help them however I can. I hesitated. And then, I don't know. Get back on the road, I guess. Life goes on. After what you've been through, no one would blame you for taking a break, Garrett said gently. Maybe even finding a different line of work. The suggestion irritated me, though I knew it came from a place of concern. And do what? Trucking is all I know. All I've done for 15 years. I'm not going to let some psycho chase me away from my livelihood. Okay, Garrett backpedaled. "Just saying you have options, that's all. Your safety matters more than any job." We talked a while longer, making plans to meet up when I returned from Portland. As I hung up the phone, I realized how much this ordeal had affected me. Not just the initial fear, but the lingering hypervigilance, the way I now scanned every parking lot and rest area for potential threats, the tension that crept into my body whenever headlights appeared in my mirrors and stayed there too long. Would I ever feel completely safe on the road again? Or had something fundamental changed, some innocence lost that could never be recovered? I returned to my truck and climbed into the sleeper cab, setting my alarm for 5 hours later. Despite my racing thoughts, exhaustion soon pulled me under into a dreamless sleep. The rest of the journey to Portland passed without incident. I delivered my cargo on schedule, spent a night in a proper motel for a change, and began the return trip. As promised, I called Detective Warren when I reached Twin Falls again. "We've made progress," he told me over the phone. "Found some promising evidence in the vehicle. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning?" I agreed to meet him at 9 a.m. and spent another night in a motel, my sleep restless with anticipation. The next morning, I arrived at the Idaho State Police headquarters to find Warren waiting for me in the lobby. "Thank you for coming in," he said, leading me to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. "I have some photographs I'd like you to look at, and then we'll need your formal statement." For the next hour, I looked through dozens of mugshots and driver's license photos, searching for a face that might match the shadowy figure I'd glimpsed at the rest stop. None seemed quite right, though a few had similarities that I noted for Warren. After the photos, I gave my statement, a detailed account of everything that had happened that night, from my arrival at the rest stop to my escape on the dirt road. When I finished, Warren leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "We've pieced together quite a bit from the evidence in the car," he said. "Enough to believe we're looking for a single perpetrator rather than a group, someone with a detailed knowledge of truck routes and schedules, someone who's been watching and planning for years." "Any idea of motive?" I asked. Warren hesitated, then seemed to decide I deserved some answers. "We found a journal in the vehicle, rambling, often incoherent, but with a clear theme. Revenge for a trucking accident that killed the writer's family. Wife and daughter, apparently. He blames all truck drivers, sees them as collectively responsible." The information settled like a stone in my stomach. "So he's targeting random drivers as revenge?" "That appears to be the case," Warren confirmed. "The journal describes a process, stalking, isolating, then—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear. "And the missing drivers?" I asked, dreading the answer. Warren's expression was grim. "We're expanding our search to remote areas along the dirt road where you lost your pursuer. Based on items found in the vehicle, we believe there may be remains to be recovered." I closed my eyes briefly, a wave of nausea washing over me. Those drivers, men like me, with families and futures, gone because they happened to pull into the wrong rest stop on the wrong night. It could so easily have been me among them. "Do you have any suspects?" I asked when I trusted myself to speak again. "We're closing in on someone," Warren said. "A former mechanic who lost his family in an accident with a semi 5 years ago. He disappeared shortly after, dropped off the grid completely. The journal mentions locations that match places he would have known. So what happens now?" "We continue the investigation, follow every lead, and you—" Warren fixed me with a serious look. "You stay vigilant. Until we have this individual in custody, there's a chance he could return. And if he realizes you're helping with the investigation—" He didn't need to finish the thought. I was a witness, potentially a threat to someone who had already demonstrated a willingness to kill. The weight of that realization settled heavily on my shoulders. "I understand," I said. "I'll be careful." Warren walked me out of the station, thanking me again for my cooperation. As I climbed back into my truck, I felt both relieved and unsettled. Relieved that the investigation was progressing, that my experience had been validated and taken seriously, but unsettled by the confirmation of just how close I had come to becoming another victim. In the months that followed, I kept in regular contact with Detective Warren. The investigation progressed. They identified their primary suspect, a man named Howard Gaines, whose wife and 8-year-old daughter had been killed when a semi jackknifed on an icy highway and crushed their car. After the accident, Gaines had seemed to accept the ruling that the trucking company wasn't at fault. Icy conditions, mechanical failure that couldn't have been predicted. But inwardly his grief had twisted into something dark and vengeful. They found him in January 1995, living in an abandoned hunting cabin in the hills where I had evaded him that night. The cabin was a shrine to his lost family, photos covering the walls, toys and clothing preserved as if waiting for their owners to return, and maps, detailed maps of trucking routes, rest stops marked with dates and times, photos of rigs taken from a distance. He didn't surrender peacefully. When officers approached the cabin, Gaines opened fire, wounding one officer before being shot multiple times himself. He survived barely and was eventually charged with 3 counts of murder when the bodies of the missing drivers were recovered from shallow graves in the hills. I testified at his trial in the summer of 1995, recounting my experience at the rest stop and the subsequent chase. Gaines sat at the defense table, a thin, hollow-eyed man who never once looked at me or showed any remorse. He was sentenced to life without parole, and as they led him from the courtroom he finally spoke, not to me or the families of his victims, but to the judge. "They take and take," he said, his voice eerily calm, "and no one pays. Someone had to make them pay." I continued driving for another 5 years after that, but something had changed. The open road no longer held the same appeal. The solitude no longer felt comfortable or freeing. Every dark rest stop, every set of headlights in my mirror brought back memories of that night in Idaho. In 1999, I took a job training new drivers instead, keeping me closer to home and off the long-haul routes. Sometimes I think about how close I came to becoming one of Gaines's victims, how my instincts and a bit of luck were all that stood between me and a shallow grave in the hills. If I had ignored the sound of someone trying my door, if I had confronted the figure directly at the rest stop instead of following cautiously, if I hadn't taken that dirt road when the car was pursuing me, any one of those decisions could have led to a different outcome. I've been asked over the years if I regret stopping at that rest area, if I wish I had just pushed through to the next truck stop despite my fatigue. But I don't see it that way. My experience helped bring a killer to justice, helped provide closure for the families of those who weren't as fortunate as I was. In a strange way, the worst night of my life may have saved others from a similar fate. The highway between Phoenix and Portland is still there, and trucks still travel it day and night. Most drivers passing through have probably never heard of Howard Gaines or the Twin Falls rest area murders. But among the older truckers, the veterans of the road, the story is passed down as a warning. A reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't mechanical failures or bad weather, but the darkness that can lurk in the human heart. And a reminder to trust your instincts, to listen to that inner voice when it tells you something isn't right. Because sometimes on those long, lonely stretches of highway, that voice is the only thing standing between you and the darkness that waits beyond the headlights' reach. I knew the day was going to be rough when the donut shop ran out of glazed. That's the kind of omen that makes you wonder if you should just call it quits early. But no, I still had a job to do. Been doing it for 12 years here in Craven Springs, West Virginia. Name's Michael Prescott, small-town cop, born and raised right here in the same place. Craven ain't big, but it's home. You know the type. A few thousand people, everyone's in your business. And if you don't wave to Mrs. Hill at the corner store, you'll hear about it from your mama the next day. I slouched back to my cruiser, settling for a stale chocolate donut that would have been better used as a hockey puck. The April morning was gloomy, clouds hanging low like they were deciding whether to ruin everyone's day or just mine. The radio crackled with static before Joanne's voice came through. "Mike, you copy? Got a call from the Wilsons about some disturbance out near Pike Hollow." I sighed, brushing crumbs from my uniform. "What kind of disturbance? Teenagers again?" "Unclear. Sounded spooked, though. Said they heard strange noises while hiking. Not animal noises, not human either." "Yeah, we get bored in Craven Springs. Not a lot happens here. Except the occasional drunk out at the mine or some idiot getting into a bar fight at Rusty's. But things had been quiet this month. Too quiet, if you ask me. which is why, when the call came in about something going down in the woods off Pike Hollow Road, I didn't think twice. Probably some kids messing around again, getting themselves into trouble. Last time it was a bunch of teenagers trying to start a campfire during a burn ban. Figured this was the same kind of deal. I grabbed my coffee, lukewarm now, and headed out to Pike Hollow. The road twisted through town, past the shuttered textile mill and the elementary school where I'd spent my childhood. Folks waved as I drove by. Old man Jenkins sweeping his porch, Brenda walking her three-legged dog, kids playing hopscotch who probably should have been in school. The familiar sights of Craven Springs always brought me comfort, but today something felt off. Maybe it was the lack of my glazed donut, or maybe it was the way the clouds seemed to gather specifically above Pike Hollow, darkening as I approached. Pike Hollow Road wasn't on most maps. It was a local secret, a dirt path cutting through dense woods where hunters went during season and teenagers went to drink stolen beers. The road deteriorated quickly after leaving the main highway, rutted and narrow, branches scraping against my cruiser like fingernails. It was late afternoon by the time I made it out there, the sky a dull gray like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just stay miserable. Pike Hollow Road wasn't more than a dirt path that cut into the woods, the kind of place you only go if you're hunting or hiding from something. Dispatch hadn't said much, just that there were strange noises, which usually translated to someone saw a raccoon and freaked out. I parked my cruiser at the trailhead, stepped out, and gave a quick look around. The woods were dense here, thick with pine and brush that didn't see much sun. Quiet, too, in a way that didn't sit right. Even the birds were holding their breath. Something about the silence made the hairs on my neck stand up. I'd been in these woods hundreds of times, hunting, responding to calls, sometimes just walking to clear my head. Never had it felt this empty, this wrong. "All right, let's see what you kids are up to," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight and heading into the woods. The path was overgrown, barely visible in places. Spring should have brought new growth, chirping insects, the rustling of small animals. Instead, there was only the sound of my boots crushing dead leaves and the occasional snap of twigs. I pulled out my radio. "Joanne, you copy? I'm about a quarter mile in. No sign of anybody yet." The radio crackled with static. I tried again, but the signal was dead. No surprise. Cell service was spotty at best in town, non-existent out here in the hollow. As the trees grew denser, the light dimmed, filtering through branches in weak, scattered beams. The smell changed too, earthy and damp, but with something underneath, something sour. Like meat left too long in the sun. A branch cracked somewhere to my left. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, catching only shadows. "Police officer, anyone there?" My voice sounded small in the vast emptiness of the woods. No response. I continued down the path, my unease growing with each step. The Wilsons weren't the type to make calls over nothing. Arnold Wilson was an ex-Marine who'd seen combat in Iraq. His wife Beth grew up in these woods. If something spooked them, it wasn't a raccoon or teenagers with firecrackers. The path forked ahead, one branch continuing deeper into the hollow, the other rising toward a ridge. I hesitated, then noticed something caught on a thorn bush by the lower path, a scrap of fabric, blue flannel. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "Anyone need help?" Only silence answered. I followed the lower path, moving slower now, more cautious. The trees seemed to press closer, branches reaching like gnarled hands. The gray sky had disappeared completely, hidden by the thick canopy. Though it was only late afternoon, the forest floor was dark as twilight. The path ended abruptly at a small clearing, circular and unnatural looking, as if someone had deliberately cut away the vegetation. In the center stood a large oak, ancient and twisted, its trunk swollen and deformed, and at its base, a boot. Not just any boot, a hiking boot, heavy-duty, expensive, the kind Arnold Wilson would wear. "Arnold?" I called, sweeping my flashlight around the clearing. "Beth, it's Officer Prescott." Something rustled behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing but shadows. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes tracking my movements from the darkness between the trees. I stepped forward and picked up the boot. It wasn't just abandoned. It had been torn, the leather ripped and shredded. And it was still warm, as if recently removed, or torn from someone's foot. That's when I noticed the first splash of red on the ground, dark against the brown leaves. Blood. Fresh. A trail of it led away from the clearing, deeper into the woods where the trees grew so dense that daylight barely penetrated. I should have called for backup, should have returned to my cruiser, radioed in what I'd found. But something, curiosity, duty, stupid bravery, pushed me forward, following the blood trail into the darkness. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't some teenagers playing a prank. There was something off, and not just the quiet. About 100 yards in, I found a boot. Not like a kid's sneaker, a real hiking boot, heavy duty, meant for rough terrain. Great, lost hiker, I said, shaking my head. But when I picked it up, it was still warm. I kept walking, now more alert, the kind of alert that tells you something's out of place, but you can't quite put your finger on it. A few minutes later, I spotted something else, a smear of something dark on the trunk of a tree. Blood. The smear was at shoulder height, a handprint dragged downward, as if someone had leaned against the tree, then collapsed. I played my flashlight around the area, revealing more blood, drops and smears leading further into the darkness. Suddenly, the woods didn't feel so peaceful anymore. I wasn't armed. Yeah, I know, a cop without a gun. But the truth is, here in Craven Springs, you don't usually need one. Last time I used it was to scare off a coyote messing with some cattle. My service pistol was locked up back at the station, along with my bulletproof vest. Didn't think I'd need them for a simple call about noises in the woods. Big mistake. As daylight faded, the shadows deepened, merging into a darkness that my flashlight barely penetrated. The blood trail continued, no longer just smears, but puddles now, black in the dim light. I followed it around a dense thicket and stopped dead. Ahead, the trail opened onto another clearing, smaller than the first, and in its center lay a backpack, torn open, its contents scattered across the forest floor, a water bottle, a map, a first aid kit, and more blood. So much more blood. The coppery smell hit me first, thick and overwhelming. Then I saw the source. A dark shape slumped against a fallen log. A body. I approached slowly, my flashlight trained on the figure. It was a man, middle-aged, dressed in hiking gear. His face was turned away, but I recognized the jacket. Arnold Wilson's favorite red and black plaid. "Arnold," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" I reached out to check for a pulse, but my hand froze mid-air. The body wasn't just dead. It was wrong. The torso was caved in, ribs protruding at impossible angles. One arm was missing entirely, torn away at the shoulder, and his face, what remained of it, wore an expression of such terror that I felt my own heart stutter. "Jesus," I muttered, scrambling backward. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a heart attack on the trail or a fall from a ridge. This was violence, predation. Something rustled in the underbrush behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through darkness, catching a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Something large, something fast. Something that was now watching me. The deeper I went, the worse it got. I found more blood. Not splatters, but streaks, like someone had been dragged. The trail led further into the woods, where the trees got thicker, the light barely making it through the canopy. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to run, to get back to my cruiser and call in what I'd found. But all I could think about was Beth Wilson. If Arnold was dead, where was she? The blood trail continued, smeared across fallen logs and tree trunks. In places, it looked like someone had tried to crawl, desperate fingernail marks gouged into the soil. I followed it down a steep embankment, my boots sliding on the damp earth. At the bottom, a small stream gurgled through the hollow, water flowing black in the fading light. The blood trail ended at the water's edge, but I could see marks on the opposite bank. Something had crossed. I waded through the shallow water, ice cold around my ankles, and climbed the far bank. Here, the forest changed. The familiar oaks and maples gave way to older growth, gnarled pines with twisted trunks, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy above. Little undergrowth grew in the perpetual twilight beneath. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through branches. Just the sound of my breathing, too loud in the stillness, and the distant muffled gurgle of the stream. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal, a low, gurgling grunt like something was choking on its own breath. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling across the forest floor. The sound came again, closer now to my right. Slowly I turned, directing my light toward it. Nothing but trees and shadows. "All right, Billy," I said to myself, my voice shaking. "Just figure out what it is, call it in and get out. No need to be a hero." I pushed through the underbrush, my flashlight flickering in and out, casting weird shadows that made the trees look like they were closing in on me. The pine needles underfoot muffled my steps, but they also obscured the ground, hiding roots and stones that threatened to trip me with each step. The gurgling sound grew louder, punctuated now by a wet tearing noise, like someone ripping apart wet cardboard or flesh. I crept forward, moving from tree to tree, using their trunks as cover. The smell hit me first, stronger now, the coppery scent of blood mixed with something fouler, something rotten. Then I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. At first I thought it was just a large deer or maybe a bear. But no, this thing was wrong. It had the size of a grizzly, but its limbs were too long, too gangly, like a spider with skin stretched tight over bones. The head was misshapen, like someone had taken a wolf and smashed its face in. But the worst part was its mouth, a gaping hole lined with sharp teeth, not natural, not in any way I'd ever seen before, and it was dragging something, someone, a body. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move, not with this thing standing there, gnawing at the mangled body like it was nothing more than a chew toy. The creature hunched over its prey, back to me, massive shoulders working as it tore at flesh. The body beneath it was small, dressed in blue. Beth Wilson. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the canopy above, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. My stomach lurched. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from vomiting, to keep from making any sound at all. The creature paused, raising its misshapen head. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. It hadn't seen me yet. Thank God. I slowly backed up, hoping the crunch of dead leaves underfoot wouldn't give me away. That's when it looked up. For a split second we locked. I don't want to say eyes because I never saw them. Whatever it had, it knew I was there. And it didn't like being watched. The thing rose to its full height, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, its limbs unfolding like a grotesque marionette. For one horrible moment it just stared at me, head cocked to one side. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass, and screamed. The sound hit me like a physical force, high-pitched and guttural at once, vibrating through my skull. It wasn't anger in that cry, or hunger. It was hatred, pure and ancient. I turned and ran. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. My heart was pounding in my ears, my legs burning as I pushed myself faster than I ever thought possible. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, roots caught at my feet. I stumbled, nearly fell, caught myself against a tree trunk. Behind me, the creature's footsteps grew louder, its breathing a wet, hungry sound. But I knew I wasn't going to make it. This thing was faster, stronger, and hungry. There was a split-second decision. I couldn't outrun it, but maybe I could outsmart it. I veered off the trail, diving into a patch of thick brush. I crouched down, holding my breath, hoping the darkness and the dense foliage would hide me. The noise stopped. I sat there in the silence, my chest heaving. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins, the sweat dripping down my face. For a moment I thought I'd lost it. Then I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps. It was searching for me, hunting me. Through the leaves I caught glimpses of it, a massive shape moving between trees, head swinging back and forth as it sniffed the air. It was tracking me, following my scent. I pressed myself deeper into the brush, ignoring the thorns that dug into my skin. My flashlight was off now, clutched in a white-knuckle grip. If I moved, if I made any sound at all, it would find me. The creature paused just yards from my hiding place. In the dim light I could see it more clearly now. Its skin wasn't fur or hide, but something else. A mottled, grayish membrane stretched over a skeletal frame. Where its face should have been was just that terrible mouth and 2 ragged holes for nostrils. It turned slowly, scanning the forest. Then it dropped to all fours, pressing its face to the ground where I had stepped. It was like watching a dog follow a scent trail, except this was no dog. This was something out of a nightmare. The creature raised its head, looking directly at my hiding place. It knew where I was. It had to. I held my breath, pressed myself into the earth, praying for invisibility. The creature took one step toward me, then another. Then somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. The creature's head whipped around toward the sound. It hesitated, torn between the prey it sensed and the new disturbance. Another snap, louder this time, and it made its decision. With a low growl, it loped off toward the noise, disappearing into the darkness. I had to get back to the cruiser, back to the safety of something metal and solid. The radio. I could call for backup. I just needed to move without it hearing me. Slowly, painfully, I crawled from my hiding place. Every muscle screamed in protest, every scratch and bruise making itself known now that the immediate danger had passed. But I couldn't stop, couldn't rest. That thing was still out there, and it wasn't done hunting. As I crawled through the underbrush, the sound of its footsteps grew distant. Maybe it was giving up, or maybe it had found another victim. Either way, I didn't care. All that mattered was getting out alive. I oriented myself toward where I thought the stream was. If I could find it, I could follow it back to where I'd crossed, then retrace my steps to the cruiser. It was my only hope of navigation in the growing darkness. The forest seemed to shift around me, trees looming where I didn't remember them, paths disappearing into solid walls of vegetation. Had I gone in circles? Was I moving deeper into the hollow instead of out? Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced it down, focusing on my breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. I was a cop. I was trained for emergencies. I could do this. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it back to the trail, but the cruiser was still a ways off. I was about to make a break for it when I heard a scream. Not human, but not animal either, like something in pain. Against every instinct I had, I stopped. I looked back. What the hell was I thinking? Just run. But something made me freeze again. Maybe it was the fact that if I ran, I'd just lead it back to the town and someone else would get killed. Maybe it was the fact that I'm a cop and it's my job to protect people. I don't know. But I turned back. The scream came again, echoing through the trees. It wasn't the creature's hunting cry, but something different. A sound of pain, of fury, and mixed with it, barely audible, a human voice. Someone else was out there, someone still alive. I couldn't leave them, not to that thing. Cursing my own stupidity, I turned away from safety and moved back toward the sounds of conflict. The forest was nearly pitch black now, the last light of day long gone. My flashlight beam seemed feeble against the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The noises grew louder, thrashing, snarling, the crack of underbrush. I moved carefully, placing each foot with deliberate silence. One mistake, one snapped twig, and I might draw the creature's attention. I crested a small rise and looked down into a ravine. There, illuminated by moonlight breaking through the canopy, was a scene from hell. The creature was there, thrashing wildly, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. Across from it stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, holding what looked like a hunting rifle. He had shot it. The crazy bastard had actually shot the thing. The creature lunged at him, but its movements were sluggish now. The man sidestepped, raised his rifle for another shot, but he was too slow. The creature's elongated arm swept out, catching him across the chest, sending him flying. He hit a tree trunk with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground, the rifle falling from his grasp. The creature shambled toward him, wounded but still deadly. Blood, or something like it, dripped from a hole in its chest, black in the moonlight. I didn't think. I just acted. Rushing down the slope, I grabbed the fallen rifle. The creature spun at the sound of my approach, its ruined face contorting in what might have been surprise. Without even aiming, I fired a shot straight into the creature's chest. It screamed. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. A high-pitched wail mixed with the gurgling of blood. It stumbled backward, falling to the ground in a heap of limbs and fur. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't going to be getting up any time soon. I dropped the rifle, shaking, and bent down to check on the man. He was barely conscious, bleeding from several deep gashes across his torso. His face was pale, eyes unfocused, breath coming in shallow gasps. "You all right?" I asked, though it was obvious he wasn't. He coughed, blood dribbling down his chin. "That thing," was all he managed before his eyes rolled back in his head. I looked at the creature still twitching on the ground, its breath shallow. Whatever it was dying, and I was glad for it. But I had no time for relief. The man was fading fast, losing blood from multiple wounds. I had to get him help, and soon. I tore strips from my uniform shirt, binding the worst of his gashes as best I could. Then, with strength born of desperation, I hoisted him over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. The weight nearly brought me to my knees, but I steadied myself against a tree. "Hang on," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. "Just hang on." Step by painful step, I carried him back toward the trail, toward my cruiser. Each movement was agony, the man's weight crushing me, my own muscles screaming from exertion and the aftermath of terror. Behind us, the creature's cries grew fainter, then stopped altogether. Had it died? Or was it just waiting, gathering strength for another attack? I couldn't afford to find out. The journey back seemed endless. Every landmark I passed was unfamiliar in the darkness, every path a mystery. Twice I had to stop and reorient myself, fighting panic as the night pressed in around us. The man's breathing grew more labored, his blood soaking through my makeshift bandages, warm against my skin. "Stay with me," I urged him. "We're almost there." A lie, but a necessary one, for both of us. When I finally stumbled onto Pike Hollow Road, the sight of my cruiser was like a mirage in a desert. It sat exactly where I'd left it, solid and real and safe. I fumbled with the keys, hands slick with blood and sweat, and managed to unlock the back door. Gently I laid the man across the back seat. In the dome light I got my first good look at him. Mid-30s, rugged features beneath a week's growth of beard, hunting clothes torn and bloody. Not a local, at least not one I recognized. I slammed the door and ran to the driver's side, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. As I threw the car into reverse, something moved at the edge of the headlight's reach. A flicker of movement, a suggestion of that misshapen form. Then nothing. I didn't wait to see more. I gunned the engine, tires spitting gravel as I backed onto the main road, then sped toward town. The radio crackled to life as soon as I hit the highway. "Dispatch, this is Officer Prescott. I need an ambulance at the station ASAP. I've got a man with severe lacerations, massive blood loss." Joanne's voice came back, tense with concern. "Copy that, Mike. What happened out there?" I can't." I glanced in the rearview mirror at the man, his chest barely rising. "Just get that ambulance ready." The drive back to Craven Springs passed in a blur of adrenaline and fear. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that thing loping after us, its grotesque form illuminated in my taillights. But the road behind us remained empty, the darkness unbroken. When I reached the station, Sheriff Bowman was waiting outside, his weathered face grim in the floodlights. The ambulance arrived seconds later, paramedics rushing to extract the injured man from my back seat. "Jesus, Mike, what happened to you?" Bowman asked, eyeing my torn shirt, the blood staining my hands and face. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? "There's something in the woods," I finally managed. "Something that killed the Wilsons, and it nearly killed this guy, too." Bowman's face darkened. "The Wilsons are dead?" I nodded, the horror of what I'd witnessed washing over me anew. "Torn apart, both of them. And whatever did it, it wasn't natural, Sheriff. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before." The paramedics loaded the man onto a stretcher, attaching IV lines, pressing gauze to his wounds. One of them looked up at me, her face drawn. "He's in shock. BP's dropping. We need to move now." As they rushed him toward the ambulance, his eyes fluttered open, fixing on me with sudden clarity. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. "It's still out there," he rasped, blood bubbling between his lips. "You didn't kill it. You can't kill it." Then he fell back, unconscious or worse, and the paramedics whisked him away, sirens wailing as they sped toward the nearest hospital in Beckley, 40 minutes away. I looked at the sheriff, at the questioning faces of the deputies who had gathered. I knew my story would sound insane. I knew they'd have questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't dispel. But I also knew what I'd seen, what was still out there in the darkness of Pike Hollow. I looked at the sheriff, at the questioning faces of the deputies who had gathered. I knew my story would sound insane. I knew they'd have questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't dispel. But I also knew what I'd seen, what was still out there, in the darkness of Pike Hollow. "We need to seal off those woods," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And we need more men, armed men." The sheriff nodded slowly, skepticism warring with trust on his weathered face. "Tell me everything, Mike. From the beginning. We never did find out what that thing was. The doctors patched the guy up, but he didn't make it through the night. Didn't matter, though. His story died with him. And the thing? Well, let's just say it didn't vanish, but it didn't stick around for long either. They carted it off to some lab upstate for testing, whatever that means. At least that's the story I repeated to myself in the days that followed. A comforting fiction, easier to swallow than the truth. The truth was messier, darker. The truth was that no one believed me. Sheriff Bowman took my statement that night, his pen scratching across paper as I described the creature, the deaths, my desperate flight through the woods. When I finished, he closed his notebook and sat in silence for a long moment. "Mike," he finally said, his voice gentle as if speaking to a child, "you've had a hell of a night. You're in shock." "I know what I saw," I insisted, anger flaring through exhaustion. "What you saw," he continued, "was probably a bear, a big one, diseased maybe, or rabid. That would explain the aggression, the attacks on humans." "Bears don't have mouths like that," I said. "They don't hunt people, track them through the woods." Bowman sighed. "When was the last time you slept, Mike? Really slept?" The question caught me off guard. What's that got to do with anything? "You've been pulling double shifts all week. Stress, fatigue, the darkness. They can play tricks on your mind." I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I saw the decision already made in his eyes. This would be ruled a bear attack. Simple, clean, explicable. "What about the Wilsons?" I asked. "What about the man I brought in?" "We'll send a team out at first light to recover the bodies. And the man, well, we'll see if he pulls through. Maybe he can tell us more." But the man didn't pull through. He died at 3:17 a.m. at Beckley Memorial Hospital, never regaining consciousness. The doctors cited massive blood loss and trauma. They noted the unusual pattern of his wounds, unlike any bear attack they'd seen, but such details were lost in the broader narrative being constructed. A tragic accident, a rogue bear, a heroic rescue attempt that came too late. The recovery team found the Wilsons' bodies exactly where I said they'd be, what remained of them anyway. They also found evidence of a large animal, broken branches, disturbed earth, blood trails, but they found no sign of the creature I described, no carcass, no blood trail leading away from where I'd shot it. Nothing to corroborate my story of a monster with a misshapen head and too many teeth. "It was wounded," I argued when they returned. "I shot it in the chest. It couldn't have gone far." "We followed every trail, Mike," Deputy Graham said, not unkindly. "Whatever you shot at, it either wasn't hit or it managed to get away." The news spread through Craven Springs like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew about the Wilsons, about the mysterious hiker, about my wild tale of a monster in Pike Hollow. Some believed me. Most didn't. I couldn't blame them. If someone had told me the same story a day earlier, I'd have laughed them out of town. But I knew what I'd seen, and I couldn't let it go. After the official search was called off, I returned to Pike Hollow alone. I told no one where I was going, what I was looking for. They would have stopped me, concerned for my mental state, my safety. The woods seemed different in daylight, ordinary. The towering pines, the ancient oaks, the undergrowth, all familiar, all harmless. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, insects buzzed. Life continued, undisturbed by the horror that had unfolded beneath these same branches. I retraced my steps, following the now dried blood trails to where the Wilsons had died, to where I had hidden in the brush, to the ravine where I had shot the creature. Here the evidence remained. Broken branches, trampled earth, dark stains on rocks and leaves, and something else, a trail leading away, something heavy dragging itself through the underbrush. I followed it, weapon drawn this time, every sense alert for danger. The trail wound deeper into the hollow, into areas I'd never explored, where the trees grew so dense that noon became twilight. It ended at a cave mouth, a dark slash in a limestone cliff face. The entrance was low, requiring me to stoop, but opened into a larger chamber within. The smell hit me first. That same rot I'd encountered before, but stronger now, concentrated. My flashlight beam played across the cave walls, revealing ancient rock formations, stalactites dripping moisture, and on the floor, drag marks. Something had been brought here, something heavy. But the cave was empty. Whatever had been here was gone. I spent hours searching the surrounding area, looking for additional caves, hidden entrances, any sign of where the creature might have gone. I found nothing but wilderness, untouched and unconcerned with human fears. When I returned to town, covered in dirt and scratches, Sheriff Bowman was waiting at my house. "Where have you been, Mike?" he asked, though his expression said he already knew. "Just clearing my head," I lied. "By going back to Pike Hollow, alone, after what happened?" I didn't answer. Bowman sighed, removing his hat. "Look, Mike, I'm concerned about you. We all are. What you went through, it would shake anyone." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "No, you're not, and that's okay. No one expects you to be, not after seeing what you saw. I'm just asking you to take some time, rest, talk to someone if you need to." "Talk to someone?" I repeated. "You mean a shrink?" "I mean someone who can help you process this. It doesn't have to be a professional, though that couldn't hurt." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "And what would I tell them? That I saw a monster in the woods? That no one believes me, even though 2 people are dead and a 3rd died in our hospital? That whatever killed them is still out there?" Bowman's face softened. 2 weeks leave, Mike. Paid, doctor's orders. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. I was being taken off duty, deemed unfit to serve. "And if I refuse?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, please." I wanted to argue, to rage against the injustice of it all. But exhaustion had settled into my bones, a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. I nodded, accepting defeat, at least for now. Bowman seemed relieved. "Get some rest, Mike. Things will look clearer in the morning." But they didn't. Not the next morning or the one after that. Instead, the official narrative solidified. A bear attack, a tragic accident, a town in mourning. The Wilsons were buried, their house put up for sale, their existence slowly erased from the fabric of Craven Springs. The hiker was identified as Gregory Mason, a nature photographer from Pittsburgh. His family claimed his body, his death added to the tally of wilderness accidents that occurred every year in these mountains. And me? I became the town's cautionary tale. Officer Prescott, who'd seen too much, who'd cracked under pressure. They were kind about it, mostly. Sympathetic glances, concerned inquiries about my health, invitations to dinner or drinks meant to draw me back into the community. But beneath it all, I could sense their fear, not of the creature I'd described, but of what I represented. The fragility of sanity, the thin veneer of order that separated their comfortable lives from chaos. I spent my 2 weeks' leave in a haze of insomnia and obsession. I researched cryptids, folk monsters, unexplained phenomena in the Appalachians. I compiled accounts of similar attacks across the country, incidents brushed off as animal encounters or the work of human predators. I found patterns, disappearances in remote areas, bodies discovered with unusual wounds, sightings of creatures that defied classification, all dismissed, all explained away. When my leave ended, I returned to duty, outwardly compliant, inwardly vigilant. I patrolled the streets of Craven Springs with one eye always on the edge of town, on the dark line of trees that marked the beginning of Pike Hollow. Weeks passed, then months. Life in Craven Springs returned to normal. The tragedy faded from daily conversation, replaced by more immediate concerns. The upcoming fall festival, the high school football team's winning streak, the new stoplight at Main and Elm. But I remained changed. I carried the knowledge of what lurked in those woods, what could emerge at any moment to shatter the town's fragile peace. I kept my service weapon with me at all times now, even off duty. I installed new locks on my doors and windows. I avoided the woods after dark, and I waited. For what, I wasn't sure. Another attack, vindication, or perhaps for the memory to fade, for doubt to creep in, for me to join the ranks of those who believed the official story? That moment never came. Instead, 6 months after the incident in Pike Hollow, a hiker went missing in the national forest 20 miles north. Search parties found nothing but a backpack, a broken camera, and blood-soaked earth. 2 weeks later, a family camping near Beckley reported strange noises in the night, described a creature glimpsed in their flashlight beams, tall, gaunt, with too many teeth. And in early December, a hunter was found dead in woods just outside Craven Springs, his body torn apart in a manner that the coroner could only describe as inconsistent with known animal predation. Each incident was explained away: a mountain lion, a bear, human killers, hysteria. But I knew better. It was moving, hunting, and eventually it would return to Pike Hollow, to the cave where it had retreated to heal. I kept my theories to myself this time. I stopped trying to convince others of what I knew to be true. Instead, I prepared. I studied tracking, wilderness survival, firearms. I mapped the cave systems that honeycomb these mountains. I learned everything I could about predator behavior, about how to hunt something that views you as prey. Because that's what it is at its core, a predator. And like all predators, it can be tracked, understood, and killed. I'm still here in Craven Springs doing my job. Small-town life doesn't change, not really. People still wave when they pass by, Mrs. Hill still gossips at the corner store, and kids still find stupid ways to get themselves into trouble. But me? I don't go near those woods anymore, not without purpose, not without preparation. I leave that to others, to the innocent and the unknowing, until the day it returns, and I will be waiting. Winter came early to Craven Springs that year, blanketing the town in snow by mid-November. The cold was a blessing, keeping people indoors, away from the woods, away from danger. I'd been keeping a log of incidents, sightings, unusual animal deaths, unexplained noises reported by hikers or hunters. Plotting them on a map revealed a pattern, a slow circular movement away from Pike Hollow, then gradually back toward it, like something returning home. Sheriff Bowman had stopped questioning my off-duty activities. As long as I showed up for my shifts, kept my opinions to myself, and maintained the appearance of recovery, he was content to look the other way. The town had moved on from the tragedy, from my breakdown. Only I remained fixated, vigilant. On a Tuesday in late January, snow fell in thick, silent flakes, accumulating on streets and rooftops, transforming Craven Springs into a postcard image of small-town winter charm. I was at the diner, nursing a cup of coffee at the counter, when the call came in. "Mike, you copy?" Joanne's voice crackled through my radio. "Got a situation out at the old Reynolds place?" The Reynolds property bordered Pike Hollow, an abandoned farmhouse and barn that local kids used for parties and dares. "What kind of situation?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "Probably nothing. Some kids reported strange noises last night. Figured they were just spooked by the old house but thought someone should check it out." "I'm on it," I replied, dropping cash on the counter for my coffee. The snow had drifted high against the sides of the road, my cruiser's tires cutting the first tracks of the day as I headed toward the Reynolds place. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow before nightfall. The farmhouse came into view, a dilapidated 2-story structure with sagging porch and broken windows. Behind it, the barn listed dangerously to one side, its red paint long since weathered to a dull pink. Beyond both, the dark line of Pike Hollow's woods loomed, a stark contrast against the pristine white of the snow-covered fields. I parked in what had once been a driveway, now just a slightly less overgrown path leading to the house. The silence was absolute, the snow muffling even the sound of my car door closing. Drawing my weapon, a habit now, not procedure, I approached the house. Footprints in the snow led to and from the porch, multiple sets. The kids Joanne had mentioned, no doubt. But among them was another set, larger and strangely shaped, as if whoever or whatever had made them was walking with an unusual gait. The footprints led not to the house, but around it, toward the barn. I followed them, moving quietly despite the crunch of snow beneath my boots. The barn door hung half open, swaying slightly in the gentle wind. The large footprints led inside, but didn't come back out. I paused at the entrance, listening. Nothing but the creak of old wood, the occasional plop of snow falling from the roof. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dimness. The barn's interior was a cavern of shadows and dust, hay rotting in corners, ancient farm equipment rusting where it had been abandoned decades ago. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls and roof, creating bars of light in the darkness. The footprints continued across the dirt floor, leading to a trapdoor that I knew opened onto a root cellar beneath the barn. The trapdoor was ajar, darkness yawning beyond. I should have called for backup, should have waited for daylight, for reinforcements. But I knew that whatever was down there might not wait, and I had waited long enough. Drawing a flashlight with my free hand, I approached the trapdoor. The smell hit me first, that same rotten stench I remembered from the woods, from the cave. I shined my light into the opening, revealing a crude ladder descending into darkness. With a deep breath, I began the climb down, weapon first, flashlight illuminating each rung before I trusted it with my weight. The cellar below was larger than I expected, extending beyond the footprint of the barn above. The walls were packed earth, the ceiling low enough that I had to stoop. My flashlight beam picked out root vegetables long since rotted to mush, empty preserving jars, a rusted shovel leaning against one wall, and footprints in the dirt floor, those same strange tracks leading deeper into the cellar. I followed them, moving slowly, every sense alert for danger. The cellar narrowed into a tunnel, rough-hewn and ancient-looking. This was no root cellar extension. This was something older, something dug for another purpose entirely. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder, damper. Moisture dripped from the ceiling, splashing onto my shoulders. The walls changed from packed earth to natural stone. I was entering a cave system. The realization struck me with certainty. These tunnels connected to the caves in Pike Hollow. The creature had been using them to move undetected, to hunt across a wider range without being seen. I continued forward, deeper into the earth. The tunnel widened into a chamber, then split into multiple passages. I paused, uncertain which way to go. Then I heard it, that same gurgling grunt I'd heard in the woods months ago, echoing from the leftmost passage. My heart hammered in my chest, but my hands remained steady. This was what I had prepared for, what I had been waiting for. I moved toward the sound, weapon raised, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and the smell intensified, rot and decay and something else, something chemical and sharp. My flashlight revealed the source. The chamber's floor was littered with bones, animal bones mostly, deer, raccoon, fox, but among them unmistakably human remains. A skull picked clean, a femur snapped in half, ribs scattered like thrown sticks. And in the center of this macabre collection, hunched over a fresh kill, a deer, its entrails steaming in the cold air, was the creature. It looked different in the stark beam of my flashlight, thinner, its skin pulled tighter over its skeletal frame. The wound in its chest had healed, leaving a puckered scar in the grayish membrane. Its head lifted at my approach, that terrible mouth opening in what might have been surprise. For a moment we regarded each other across the chamber, predator and prey, though which was which remained to be seen. "I know what you are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know you've been hunting in these mountains, killing people, animals. I know you're intelligent enough to hide, to use these tunnels to move around." The creature rose to its full height, bones cracking as it straightened. It tilted its head, regarding me with what seemed like curiosity. "You wounded me," it said. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because it spoke, though that was shocking enough, but because of the voice itself. It wasn't the growl of a monster or the hiss of an animal. It was a human voice, raspy and disused, but recognizable. Arnold Wilson's voice. What are you?" I managed, fighting the urge to run, to scream. The creature took a shambling step forward. "I am hunger," it said, Arnold's voice distorting around the words. "I am the darkness in these woods. I have always been here." "No," I shook my head, backing up a step. "You're wearing Arnold's voice like you're wearing—" I couldn't finish the thought. The creature moved closer, its limbs jerking unnaturally. "I take what I need," it said. "Voice, skin, meat. I consume. I become—" Understanding dawned, horrible and complete. This thing didn't just kill its victims. It absorbed them somehow, took pieces of them into itself. Was that why it had taken the Wilsons' bodies? Why the wounded hunter had never been found, despite my best efforts? "Stay back," I warned, raising my weapon higher. The creature paused, its head tilting further, nearly upside down now. "You hurt me," it said again, this time in a different voice, younger, female, Beth Wilson's voice. But I learned, bullets hurt but do not kill, not if I feed soon after. It was toying with me, I realized, showing off its trophies, its stolen voices, creating the maximum terror before it attacked. Well, two could play that game. "I've been tracking you," I said, moving slowly to one side, forcing it to turn to follow me. "Every kill, every sighting. I know your patterns now. Others do too. State police, wildlife rangers. They're on their way here right now." A lie, but a necessary one. I needed to unbalance it, to make it hesitate. The creature's mouth opened wider, revealing those rows of glass-like teeth. Was it smiling? "Lies," it said, this time in the voice of the hunter I'd tried to save. "You are alone. You have always been alone." It lunged faster than anything its size should move, arms outstretched to grab me. I fired once, twice, 3 times, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. The bullets hit, punching holes in that gray membrane, but the creature didn't stop. It slammed into me, knocking the gun from my hand, sending me sprawling onto the bone-littered floor. Pain exploded through my shoulder as I landed hard. The creature loomed over me, blood, or whatever passed for it, dripping from its wounds onto my face. Its mouth opened, wider than should be possible, ready to tear into me as it had its other victims. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. My hand closed around something solid on the cave floor, a human femur, long and heavy. I swung it with all my strength, connecting with the side of the creature's misshapen head. It staggered, more surprised than hurt. I scrambled away, searching desperately for my weapon in the darkness. The flashlight had rolled away, casting wild shadows across the chamber as it spun. The creature recovered quickly, turning toward me with renewed fury. It spoke again, this time in a chorus of voices. Arnold, Beth, the hunter, others I didn't recognize, a cacophony of the dead. "You cannot kill me," they said in unison. "I have lived in these mountains since before your kind built towns. I will live here long after you are gone." My hand found my gun, cold metal against my fingertips. I grabbed it, rolled onto my back, and aimed at the approaching monstrosity. "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but you won't live through today." I fired again, emptying my magazine into the creature's chest, where I'd wounded it before. It screamed, that same unholy sound I'd heard in the woods, but didn't fall. Instead it charged, crossing the distance between us in 2 massive strides. I threw myself sideways, barely avoiding its grasp. My shoulder hit the cave wall, sending fresh pain shooting down my arm. The gun was empty, useless now. I needed another weapon, another plan. The flashlight's beam caught on something metal propped against the far wall, the rusted shovel from the root cellar. The creature had brought it down here, for what purpose I couldn't imagine, but it was solid, sharp-edged, heavy. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the wooden handle just as the creature grabbed my ankle. It yanked, dragging me backward across the bone-strewn floor. I kicked with my free leg, connecting with its arm, buying myself seconds of freedom. Scrambling to my feet, I hefted the shovel like a baseball bat. The creature rose again, blood flowing freely from its wounds now, its movements slower but no less determined. "You die now," it said, this time in my own voice, a perfect mimicry that sent chills down my spine. "Not today," I answered, and swung the shovel with every ounce of strength I had left. The rusted edge caught the creature across its neck, not a killing blow but enough to make it stagger back. I pressed the advantage, swinging again and again, driving it backward toward the chamber wall. With each blow, the creature weakened, its regenerative abilities apparently overtaxed by the gunshot wounds. It tried to grab the shovel, but I twisted away, bringing the edge down on its extended arm. The limb broke with a sickening crack, hanging useless at its side. The creature howled, a sound of pure hatred and rage. I didn't let up. I couldn't. This was my one chance to end it, to avenge the Wilsons, the hunter, all the other victims this thing had claimed over who knew how many years. With a final desperate heave, I drove the shovel's edge into the creature's chest, right through the bullet wounds, with enough force that the rusted metal punched through its back, pinning it to the cave wall behind. The creature thrashed, its working arm clawing at the shovel handle, trying to free itself. But the weapon was lodged deep, and with each movement, the wounds in its chest tore wider. I backed away, breath coming in ragged gasps, watching as the thing that had haunted my nightmares for months slowly weakened, its struggles growing feebler, its stolen voices falling silent. Finally it hung motionless, impaled on the shovel, black fluid pooling beneath it. Dead? I wasn't sure, but incapacitated, at least for now. I needed to make sure it stayed that way. The chamber was lined with rotting vegetation and bones, kindling. My cruiser had road flares in the trunk, and I had matches in my pocket. If bullets couldn't kill it, perhaps fire could. It took 3 trips to gather enough combustible material, pile it around the creature's still form, and retrieve the flares from my car. Each time I returned to the chamber, I half expected to find the creature gone, the shovel discarded on the floor. But it remained pinned, motionless but for the occasional twitch. Dead or dormant, I couldn't tell. When all was ready, I struck a match and touched it to the pile. The flame caught quickly, racing through the dry vegetation, creating a pyre that soon engulfed the creature's body. As the fire grew, the chamber filled with thick, acrid smoke. The creature's skin bubbled and blackened, peeling away to reveal something beneath that wasn't bone or muscle, but something else. Something I couldn't and didn't want to identify. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, watching as the fire consumed what remained of the thing that had terrorized these woods. Only when the heat became unbearable, the smoke too thick to breathe, did I finally turn and make my way back through the tunnels, up the ladder, and into the blessed normality of the winter afternoon. Outside, snow was falling again, heavier now, erasing my tracks, covering the world in clean white. I stood in the farmyard, lungs burning, clothes torn and bloody, and watched as black smoke began to seep from cracks in the barn's foundation. The fire would spread, the barn would burn, perhaps the house too, and with them the entrance to the tunnels, the evidence of what had lived beneath these mountains. Let it burn. Let it all burn. I called it in from my cruiser. Structure fire at the Reynolds place, possible lightning strike, no casualties. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the barn was fully engulfed, beyond saving. They focused on keeping the flames from spreading to the surrounding woods, from threatening the town beyond. No one questioned my presence at the scene, my torn uniform, the blood on my hands. In the chaos of the fire, such details were overlooked, forgotten in the more immediate crisis. When the sheriff arrived, he took one look at me and knew. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that some questions were better left unasked, some stories better left untold. "It's over, isn't it?" he said quietly, as we watched the barn collapse in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "Yes," I answered, "it's over." And it was. The killing stopped. The sightings ended. Pike Hollow returned to being just another stretch of woods, remarkable only for its quiet beauty, its abundance of game. Spring came, then summer. The Reynolds property was cleared, the charred remains of the barn and house hauled away, the land reclaimed by nature. No one ever discovered the tunnels beneath, now collapsed and sealed by the fire and subsequent demolition. Life in Craven Springs returned to its familiar rhythms. I continued my patrols, waved to Mrs. Hill at the corner store, broke up fights at Rusty's. On the surface, nothing had changed, but I had. I carried the knowledge of what had lived in these mountains, what had hunted these woods. I knew there were things in this world that defied explanation, that existed in the shadows of our understanding. I still don't go near those woods if I can help it. Not because I fear finding that creature again. I'm certain it's gone, reduced to ash in the inferno I created. No, I stay away because some places retain the memory of the horrors they've witnessed, and Pike Hollow has witnessed more than its share. But I'm still here, back in Craven Springs, doing my job. Small town life doesn't change, not really. People still wave when they pass by, Mrs. Hill still gossips at the corner store, and kids still find stupid ways to get themselves into trouble. The donut shop still runs out of glazed sometimes. Bad omen or not, life goes on. And so do I, carrying the secret of what really happened in Pike Hollow, a secret I'll take to my grave, because some stories are better left untold, some nightmares better left in the darkness where they belong. The last thing I thought I'd deal with that morning was a call about a missing person. And yet, as a small-town cop in Wilson, Missouri, you get all sorts of surprises. I had just settled into the office with a stale cup of coffee when dispatch buzzed in. I remember the exact date, July 18th, 1997, because I had been planning to catch up on paperwork, not chase down a mystery. I'm Saul Markham, by the way. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 13 years, ever since I left a short-lived career as a private investigator. To be honest, small-town police work isn't glamorous. You mostly deal with minor disputes, DUIs, and the occasional burglary. But today was shaping up to be different. "Saul, we got a missing hiker," dispatch said. "Couple campers said they saw his car at Pine Ridge, but no sign of him in the woods." Pine Ridge. Of all the places, it had to be there. Local folks told stories, nothing you'd believe, but enough to make the hair on your arm stand up. Weird disappearances, strange noises at night. I wasn't one for tall tales, but the place had a reputation. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The drive to Pine Ridge took about 40 minutes, my patrol car bumping along rural roads that needed repaving years ago. The radio crackled with static between dispatcher updates. They'd managed to identify the missing hiker from his vehicle registration, Danny Lambert, 34, married, no kids. His wife reported he'd gone camping yesterday and was supposed to be back by noon today. My mind wandered to previous cases involving Pine Ridge. 3 years ago, a teenager went missing for 2 days before stumbling out of the woods, dehydrated and raving about shadows that moved wrong. Last year, a hunter claimed something stalked him through the trees for hours. We wrote it off as paranoia or maybe too much bourbon. Now, I wasn't so sure. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was nearly noon. The sun was high, making the heat almost unbearable, and the humidity clung to everything like a wet towel. The parking lot held only 2 vehicles, a beat-up Honda Civic with Missouri plates and a Chevy pickup that belonged to the campers who'd called it in. 2 men in their 20s stood beside the truck, looking anxious. They introduced themselves as Alan Weber and Mike Donahue, weekend campers from Springfield, who'd noticed the same car in the lot yesterday when they arrived and again this morning. "Thought it was weird, you know," Alan said, fidgeting with his cap. "Most folks don't stay overnight in their cars here." I nodded, jotting notes in my pad. "You boys hear or see anything unusual last night?" They exchanged glances before Alan spoke. "We heard something last night, like someone screaming, but I don't know, it didn't sound like a person. My buddy said it was probably an animal, but animals don't scream like that, not around here." "What time was this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Around 2 a.m., Mike said. "Woke us both up. Sounded far off, deeper in the woods." I radioed for backup, but the truth is Wilson PD's resources are spread thin. We don't have the manpower for extensive searches, not in these woods, and besides, I knew how this would go down. Danny would either come walking out, all sheepish for worrying everyone, or he wouldn't. Either way, it was my job to find out. I checked the Honda. Through the windows, I could see a water bottle in the cup holder, a map unfolded on the passenger seat, and a receipt dated yesterday morning from a gas station in town. I ran the plates, confirmed it belonged to Danny Lambert, mid-30s, worked as a contractor, and according to his wife, liked to take these solo hiking trips when life got too stressful. I popped the trunk. Camping gear was missing. No tent, no sleeping bag, no backpack, just some food wrappers and an empty cooler. Danny had taken his supplies, which meant he'd planned to camp overnight. He was still out there somewhere. The trail into Pine Ridge started just beyond the parking lot. A wooden sign warned hikers to stay on marked paths and to pack out what they packed in. Below, someone had scratched the words, "Turn back into the wood." Probably teenagers, I told myself. I shouldered my pack, checked my sidearm, and grabbed my radio. "I'm heading in," I told the campers. "You boys stay here. If I'm not back in 3 hours, call the station." They looked relieved not to be coming along. I didn't blame them. The entrance to the trail was like a mouth, dark and uninviting, the towering pines creating a tunnel of shadow even in broad daylight. As I stepped onto the path, a gust of wind swept through the trees, creating a sound like a distant moan. I shivered despite the heat. My watch read 12:15 p.m. as I entered Pine Ridge. I had no way of knowing then that what waited for me in those woods would change everything. Pine Ridge has a way of swallowing people whole. Not just in the physical sense, though that's happened too, but in how it consumes your awareness, your sense of normalcy. I should tell you something about these woods. They're dense. thick with oak, pine, and the kind of underbrush that makes you question every step you take. You can't see more than a few feet ahead once you're deep in. It's not the kind of place you want to get lost in, but it's perfect for those looking to disappear. The main trail was well marked for the first mile, red blazes painted on trees guiding hikers through the initial stretch. The path was worn from years of boots trampling the earth, but even so, roots jutted out like tripwires. I kept my pace steady, eyes scanning not just the path ahead but the surrounding woods. Something felt off from the moment I entered. The forest was too quiet. In July, these woods should be alive with birdsong, the buzzing of insects, the occasional rustle of animals moving through underbrush. Instead, a thick silence hung over everything, broken only by my footsteps and the creak of distant branches. I called out periodically, "Danny Lambert, Wilson Police Department, can you hear me?" Each time my voice seemed to fall flat, absorbed by the trees without an echo. About 2 miles in, the main trail split. According to the map at the trailhead, the left fork led to Blackwater Creek, a popular camping spot. The right continued deeper into the wilderness, eventually connecting to an old fire road. Based on what his wife had told dispatch, Danny preferred solitude when camping. I took the right path. The trail grew narrower, less maintained. Branches reached across like grasping hands, forcing me to duck and weave. The canopy above thickened, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. My watch read 1:30 p.m., but it could have been dusk for all the light that reached me. I paused to check my radio. Static. No surprise there. Pine Ridge was notorious for dead zones. I'd have to hike back to higher ground if I needed to call in. I took a swig from my water bottle and pressed on. After another half-mile, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to grow differently here. Their trunks twisted at unnatural angles, branches interlocking in patterns that felt deliberate, almost like they were forming walls. Patches where the trees grew thicker, almost unnatural in how the branches seemed to weave together, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. The ground beneath my feet changed too, no longer soft with pine needles and leaves, but hard-packed and bare in places, as if something had cleared the forest floor. I crouched down, examining the dirt. Marks, not quite footprints, dragged across the surface. Too large for deer, too distinct for bear. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, hand instinctively going to my sidearm. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But the feeling of being watched intensified, prickling along my spine. "Danny," I called again, louder this time. "Danny Lambert." Only silence answered, but within it, I thought I heard something. A sound so faint it might have been imagination, a low, rattling breath. I pushed forward, the trail now barely discernible. The forest seemed to close in around me, trees standing sentinel-like on either side. The air grew thick, not just with humidity, but with a heaviness that made each breath an effort. It carried a scent I couldn't place, not the usual forest smells of soil and vegetation, but something musky and wrong. Around 2:30 p.m., I found the first sign of Danny. A single boot, men's size 11, lying on its side just off the trail. No blood, no signs of struggle, just an abandoned boot in the middle of nowhere. I photographed it, marked the location on my map, and continued, now moving with greater caution. 10 minutes later, I found his backpack snagged on a branch. The canvas was torn on one side, contents spilled across the ground, energy bars, a flashlight, a small first aid kit. I collected what I could, searching for his trail map or journal, anything that might indicate where he'd planned to camp. Nothing. The temperature dropped as I continued deeper into the woods, a cold pocket that didn't belong in mid-July. My breath began to fog in front of me. That's when I heard it, distinct this time, a sound like wet meat being torn. I froze, listening. It came again, followed by something that might have been chewing. I drew my gun, moving as quietly as possible toward the sound. The trees opened into a small clearing, and there I saw Danny's tent, or what was left of it. The fabric had been shredded, torn apart by something with a lot more strength than any person. The ground was a mess, tracks, drag marks, blood, and no sign of Danny. I crouched down and examined the scene. Whatever had done this, it wasn't a bear. I've seen bear attacks before. This was different. The gashes in the tent were too precise, too sharp, like they'd been made by claws, but nothing I recognized. The drag marks led away from the clearing, deeper into the woods where the trees grew so dense they formed a wall of shadow. The sun was beginning its westward descent, though little light penetrated here. I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. Common sense said to turn back, bring a search team at first light. But Danny might still be alive, injured but alive. I couldn't leave without knowing. I radioed again, still nothing but static. The forest seemed to pulse around me as if breathing. The sounds had stopped, replaced by that oppressive silence. I felt the weight of the place pressing down on me. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself didn't want me there. With my gun drawn, I followed the trail of blood deeper into Pine Ridge. As I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led somewhere, that whatever waited ahead was not just expecting me, but had been waiting for a very long time. The blood trail led me through the densest part of Pine Ridge, where daylight barely penetrated the canopy. Every few yards I'd find another sign of Danny, a torn piece of clothing, a dropped item from his pack. The path twisted in ways that defied the map, doubling back on itself, circling landmarks I was certain I hadn't passed before. Time seemed to stretch and compress in these woods. My watch still worked, telling me it was approaching 4 p.m., but my body felt like I'd been walking for days. My muscles ached with a weariness that went beyond physical exertion. I found myself struggling to maintain focus, my thoughts becoming disjointed. As I rounded a massive oak, the trail opened onto a scene that stopped me cold. A small hollow surrounded by ancient trees, their trunks gnarled into shapes that resembled hunched figures. The ground was bare earth, packed hard and stained dark in places, and against the largest tree, slumped in a position no living person could maintain, was Danny Lambert. That's when I found him, or at least what was left of him. Danny's body was slumped against a tree, his torso ripped open like a butcher's shop display. His eyes, well, let's just say there wasn't much left of his face. Whatever got to him, it wasn't just trying to kill him, it had eaten parts of him. His arms were stripped of flesh, bones exposed, and his legs, well, they were just gone, torn off entirely. I gagged but held it together. I've seen my share of dead bodies, but this wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The precision of it was the most disturbing aspect. This wasn't a frenzied animal attack. The way the flesh had been removed, it was almost methodical. I approached cautiously, gun still drawn. The hollow was eerily silent. No insects, no birds, nothing but my own labored breathing. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I crouched beside what remained of Danny, checking for identification, though there was no doubt it was him. His wallet remained in the tattered remnants of his jeans, driver's license still visible with his smiling face looking up at me. I radioed for the coroner, though I doubted they'd want to see this mess. Nothing but static answered me. I was on my own. As I stood there trying to make sense of the scene, I heard something. A low rumbling sound, deep and guttural. It wasn't far off. I turned, hand on my sidearm, scanning the trees, but nothing moved. Nothing except the wind. But I knew better. Something was out there, watching. The sound came again, closer this time. Not an animal growl, nothing I could identify from my years hunting these woods. This was deeper, wetter, like stones grinding together underwater. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the forest itself was growling. Then came the smell, a putrid, rotting stench that hit me like a physical force. I covered my mouth and nose with my sleeve, eyes watering. Movement caught my attention at the edge of the hollow. Something large shifted in the shadows between the trees. Not a deer, not a bear. Its shape was all wrong, too tall, too thin in places. I kept my hand on my gun and stepped away from the body, trying to stay calm. If I could just make it back to the trailhead, call in the proper search teams, we could figure this out. There had to be an explanation, an animal, a predator we hadn't accounted for. But then I heard it again. Closer this time, a snap of a branch. The sound of something large moving through the underbrush. I glimpsed it properly for just a second, a dark shape, impossibly tall, moving with a jerking, unnatural gait between the trees. Its limbs seemed too long, joints bending at wrong angles. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Now, I'm not a sprinter, but adrenaline does wonders. My boots slammed into the ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tore through the woods. Whatever was behind me, it was fast. I could hear it, crashing through the trees, breaking through brush like it didn't care about staying quiet anymore. The forest blurred around me as I ran. I lost the trail almost immediately, weaving between trees, jumping over fallen logs, my only thought to put distance between myself and that thing. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, not just breaking branches now, but that terrible wet growling, closer with each passing second. I don't remember much about the next few minutes except the blind terror, the sheer panic of knowing something was hunting me. I nearly tripped over a fallen log, scrambled up and kept running. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to give out, but fear kept me moving. The thing behind me let out a sound that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something in between, filled with hunger and rage. It was gaining on me. I could feel its presence like a physical weight pressing against my back. I burst through a thicket and found myself facing a steep ravine. No time to go around. I half slid, half fell down the slope, rocks and dirt cascading with me. I hit the bottom hard, pain shooting through my ankle, but I forced myself up. The ravine provided a moment's reprieve, the thing above hesitating at the edge. That's when I noticed a fallen tree forming a crude bridge across the narrow stream at the ravine's bottom. I limped across it, glancing back just in time to see a shape larger than any man beginning its descent down the slope. I couldn't make out details in the fading light, just an impression of something grotesquely wrong, too many limbs or limbs in the wrong places. Desperation gave me a final burst of speed. I scrambled up the opposite side of the ravine, grabbing at roots and rocks, pulling myself upward. At the top I risked another look back. Nothing visible now, but I could hear it splashing across the stream below. I ran again, no longer caring about direction, just distance. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The forest grew lighter ahead. I was approaching its edge. With the last of my strength, I pushed forward. When I burst back onto the trailhead, I was soaked in sweat and my heart was pounding in my throat. I looked back. Nothing. No movement, no sound. It was like the forest had swallowed the creature whole, but I knew it was still out there. The parking lot was empty except for Danny's Honda and my patrol car. The campers had left, probably spooked by my prolonged absence. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As I pulled away, my headlights swept across the tree line. For just a moment, I thought I saw something standing just within the shadows, tall, still, watching. Then it was gone. I drove back to Wilson without stopping. The image of Danny Lambert's mutilated body burned into my mind, along with the half-glimpsed shape of what had done it. Something that shouldn't exist in this world, and yet did. When I got back to the station, I filed the report, brief as it was. Danny Lambert was dead, his body mauled, likely by an unidentified predator. But I didn't write everything down, not the part where I ran, not the part where I knew something was following me, because no one would believe that. No one would understand what I'd seen in those woods. Captain Reeves read my report with a frown. "Mountain lion, you think?" he asked, reaching for an easy explanation. I shook my head. "No signs of cat. The marks were different." "Bear, then," he said with finality. "We'll have Fish and Wildlife check it out." I didn't argue. What could I say? That I'd been chased by something that moved like no animal I'd ever seen? That the woods themselves felt wrong, alive in a way that made no sense? They'd have me seeing the department shrink before morning. Later that night, when the coroner came back with his findings, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Soul, this wasn't a bear. There's no animal in these woods that could have done that." His report noted the peculiar precision of the wounds, the specific parts missing from the body. He classified it as animal attack, predator unknown. The closest he could come to admitting something wasn't right. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Danny Lambert's mutilated body and felt the presence of whatever had been hunting me through those trees. I kept my service weapon on the nightstand, though what good it would do against that thing, I couldn't say. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling. I drove back out to Pine Ridge with a couple of deputies, this time fully armed. We scoured the area looking for tracks, signs, anything to explain what happened. We found nothing, no animal, no creature, just the remains of Danny Lambert in the thick, suffocating woods. What we did find raised more questions. The drag marks I'd followed had disappeared overnight, as had most of the blood. The ground around Danny's campsite had been disturbed, but not by animal tracks. Instead, there were patterns pressed into the soil, complex swirls and lines that reminded me of crop circles I'd seen in news reports. One of the deputies photographed them before the light rain washed them away. The forest felt different in daylight with other officers around, still oppressive, but no longer actively threatening. Whatever had been there the day before was either gone or hiding. I led them to the ravine where I'd nearly been caught, but there were no unusual tracks, no evidence of my pursuit. We recovered Danny's body around noon. The rain had picked up by then, a steady downpour that soaked us to the skin and washed away any remaining evidence. As we carried the body bag back to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched from the trees. The other deputies felt it too. I could tell by how they kept looking over their shoulders, hands never far from their weapons. The official report concluded that Danny Lambert died from an animal attack, predator unknown. His wife accepted this explanation, grief overshadowing any questions about the peculiar circumstances. The case was effectively closed 2 weeks later, filed away among the other unsolved mysteries of Wilson County. But I knew better. I left Pine Ridge that day knowing one thing for sure. Whatever had killed Danny Lambert wasn't done. It was still out there, lurking in those woods, waiting for the next poor soul to wander too far from the trail. As for me, I stopped going into those woods alone. Hell, I stopped going into them at all. In the months that followed, I researched similar cases across the country. Unexplained disappearances, unusual animal attacks, bodies found with precise surgical-like wounds. There weren't many, but they existed, scattered incidents spanning decades, most written off as animal attacks or exposure. A pattern emerged: remote wooded areas, solitary victims, bodies found in unusual states of dismemberment. I keep a map now, with pins marking each incident, too few to be noticeable to someone not looking, but too many to be coincidence. Something is out there in our forests, something that hunts us, not for territory or food alone, but with purpose. Intelligence. 3 months after Danny Lambert died, a hiker went missing in the Ozarks, 2 counties over. The body was found a week later, displayed in a manner identical to Danny's. I drove out to the scene but was turned away by local authorities. They didn't want an out-of-jurisdiction cop poking around their investigation. I still have nightmares. In them, I'm back in Pine Ridge, running through endless trees that all look the same. Behind me, always just out of sight, is that thing. Patient, relentless, knowing I'll tire eventually. Sometimes I wake up just as it catches me. Other times I'm forced to see its face. A face that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist except in the darkest corners of nature. Wilson has changed since then. People avoid Pine Ridge, though few could tell you exactly why. The trail has officially been closed due to environmental concerns, but locals know better. They've always known better. The stories they told weren't just tall tales after all. I've thought about leaving, finding work in some city where the forests are tamed and contained in parks. But I stay because someone needs to remember what happened to Danny Lambert. Someone needs to recognize the signs if it happens again. Last week I received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a single photograph, blurry, taken at night, of something standing at the edge of Pine Ridge, tall, thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, "It's getting bolder." I burned the photograph but can't erase it from my mind. The image confirmed what I already knew. Whatever killed Danny Lambert is still there, still hunting. And I'm left with the knowledge that there are things in this world we don't understand, things we aren't meant to understand. The body of Danny Lambert was retrieved, examined, and the report filed. There were no more questions after that, at least none asked aloud. But in the quiet moments when the wind blows through the trees just right, I remember the sound of something moving through the underbrush behind me, and I wonder when it will emerge from the woods and into our world. Because deep down, I know the truth. Pine Ridge was never our territory to begin with. We're just visitors here, and something older, something patient, is reclaiming what was always its own.